When silence descended upon Judah, the throne cried out for courage. He wasn't a king by choice, but by calling. While men bowed to idols, he rose in faith. 1 million soldiers marched against him, and he answered with a prayer. This is the story of a boy king who trusted in the God of the impossible, the boy who defeated 1 million. A heavy veil of silence hung over Jerusalem. When King Abijah rested with his ancestors, the winds of change began to stir in Judah. The throne passed to his son, Asa, who was still just a child, at one of the most fragile moments in the nation's history. Moral decay was rampant, idolatry was deeply rooted, and the people were drifting further and further from the God of their fathers. The sacred text in the second book of Chronicles, chapter 14, verses 1 and 2, reveals to us that in the first years of his reign, there were 10 years of peace in the land. But this peace was no accident. God granted this period as a time for reconstruction, and Asa used every single second to do what many adult kings never dared, to restore Judah's faithfulness to the Lord. Judah was blanketed with foreign altars, Asherah poles, and hills infested with idols and pagan practices inherited from Canaanite influence. According to F. Bruce, Canaanite religiosity was not only immoral, but destructive to any culture that wished to maintain spiritual integrity. The cults of Baal and Asherah involved ritual prostitution and sacrifices that completely disfigured the heart of true worship. Even as a young man, Asa understood that his mission was not merely to keep his throne, it was to reconsecrate the nation. And that is precisely what he did. In his first years on the throne, when most would seek only to maintain political stability, Asa tore down the altars of foreign gods, shattered the idolatrous pillars, and cut down the sacred poles. He went against the system, against the decadent traditions, against the crowd, because he stood for God. And God looked upon this heart and approved. Verse 2 sums it all up. Asa did what was good and right in the eyes of the Lord his God. Edwin Yamochi, an archaeologist and scholar of ancient Near Eastern religions, notes that the blending of Israelite worship with pagan rituals was a common problem in post-Solomonic Judea. Many kings tolerated it. Asa, however, was determined to exterminate it. Discoveries at Tel Arad confirm this very scenario. Archaeologists unearthed the remains of Israelite sanctuaries with clear evidence of religious syncretism, pagan symbols mixed with objects of worship to the Lord. This was the exact kind of idolatry that Asa decided to eradicate in his very first acts as king. The people, initially surprised, began to respond. Asa's reforms brought renewal. He didn't just destroy, he restored. He commanded the people to seek the Lord, rebuilt the altar, reorganized the Levites and priests, and called all of Judah to worship the one true God, no longer in the shadows of idolatrous groves, but in the light of a restored covenant. During those 10 years of peace, the land flourished. With the idols fallen, the rains returned at their proper time. The crops prospered, and the economy grew. Judah could breathe again. The people, once divided and confused, now had direction. Asa led with an authority derived not from military might, but from spiritual obedience. And this is precisely what marks the dawn of a new era in Judah. The throne had been occupied by powerful men before, but never by someone so young and yet so courageous. Asa didn't fear external threats because he knew the greatest enemy was the idolatry within his own gates, and he confronted it with resolve. The crown was given to him as a boy, but the heart of Asa was that of a giant. And it was during those first 10 years that he sowed the seeds of the victory that was yet to come. But like any fertile ground, the time of testing would arrive. The peace would not last forever. The eyes of a distant enemy were already turning toward Judah. A massive army would rise, and the young king, now matured by faithfulness, would have to decide whether to trust in the strength of his soldiers or to cry out once more to the God who gave him those first 10 years of rest. The season of peace continued to settle over Judah. A silence of prosperity lingered over the fields. The cities grew in harmony, and the people began to rediscover their identity as a chosen nation. During those 10 years of tranquility, Asa did not remain idle. On the contrary, it was precisely in this period that he strengthened the spiritual roots of the land, like someone preparing their house for difficult days yet to come. The word records in the second book of Chronicles, chapter 14, verses 3 through 8, and also in the first book of Kings, chapter 15, verses 12 to 14, that Asa pressed on steadfastly in his mission to purify Judah. He removed the foreign altars, tore down the idol poles, and commanded the people to seek the Lord, the God of their fathers. But the most difficult cleansing was yet to come, the one that shook the internal structures of the palace, the one that tested family ties. It was then that Asa did something few kings would ever dare. He removed his own grandmother Maacah from her position as queen mother because she had erected a horrendous idol to the goddess Asherah. For many, this act would have been seen as a dishonor, but for Asa, it was justice. He knew that you don't fight idolatry only in the sacred groves. You must rip it out even from the throne if necessary. If you believe this kind of conviction is what's missing today, let me know by hitting the like button. This decision showed the people that no privilege could override faithfulness to God, not even blood ties. The Bible affirms, although the high places were not removed from Israel, Asa's heart was fully committed to the Lord all his life. Dushtifur, 1 Kings, chapter 15, verse 14. This reveals that while he may not have eradicated every single place of improper worship, his own heart was completely devoted to the Lord. And that is what distinguishes a true reformer. Integrity before God, even while the work is still in progress. The consequences of this faithfulness began to blossom throughout the land. Cities were rebuilt, walls were reinforced, and Asa wisely organized a trained army. From Judah, he assembled a force of 300,000 men, armed with large shields and spears. From Benjamin, another 280,000 skilled soldiers with small shields and bows. A total of 580,000 prepared warriors. But Asa knew that the true power of his nation did not lie in its ranks, but in the blessing of the living God. This preparation was not a sign of distrust, but of discernment. The king did not trust in his army more than in God, but he understood that while the peace lasted, it was a time to plant, to build, and to strengthen. Kenneth Kitchen, a renowned Egyptologist and scholar of Israel's history, observes that religious reforms in ancient peoples were often used as a political tool. However, in Asa's case, we see that his motivation was deeper than strategy. It was spiritual conviction. He didn't cleanse the temple to please allies. He did it because he could not bear to see God's name profaned. The social effects of these reforms were remarkable. With idolatry weakened, the priests returned to teaching the law. The people resumed the sacred festivals. Families took up prayer once more. The land, once contaminated by profane sacrifices, now flourished under the care of a people who feared the Lord. Judah prospered. Trade was re-established. The borders were secure, and order and justice began to prevail, all because a young king decided to place God at the center of everything. But the days of peace were not destined to last forever. Judah's fame was growing, and with it, covetous eyes turned toward its fertile lands. To the south, a shadow began to move. An incomparable army was on the march. What was forming was not just another war. It was a challenge to the very God of Israel. And King Asa would have to choose: trust in his 580,000 men, or bend his knees once more before the one who truly gives the victory. If you're enjoying this story, leave an amen in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to True Light, because what comes next will leave you breathless. The peace that had reigned in Judah for 10 years had been a gift, a divine present granted to the young King Asa, so he could spiritually rebuild his nation. But all true peace will one day be tested, and the test that was approaching was like a dark cloud on the horizon, heavy, thick, and menacing. Its name was Zerah the Ethiopian. The sacred text in the second book of Chronicles, chapter 14, verses 9 and 10, describes the scene without holding anything back. Zerah marched against Judah with 1 million armed men and 300 war chariots. 1 million! It's hard to even imagine what that number meant in an era when the mere sound of 100 soldiers could send entire cities into a panic. It was an absurd number, an army as numerous as it was merciless. 300 iron war chariots, pulled by powerful horses and maneuvered by expert archers. Veritable weapons of swift and cruel destruction. Meanwhile, Asa had 580,000 soldiers, divided between Judah and Benjamin. His men were brave, yes, and trained, yes. But against that sea of spears, arrows, and horses, they were outnumbered nearly 2 to 1. It was the kind of war that, on paper, was already lost. But the Bible wasn't written to show what the paper says. It was written to reveal what heaven decides. Who was this Zerah? History doesn't give us many details, but scholars speculate he might have been a Nubian commander, a powerful people who lived south of Egypt, in the region we know today as Sudan. The Nubians were occasional allies of the Egyptians and were renowned for their skill in warfare. Archaeologists in Kerma, a fortified city of Nubia, have discovered royal tombs containing bronze weapons, ceremonial spears, and inscriptions of military conquest, which suggests that armies like Zerah's were more real than many would like to believe. Some commentators suggest that the name Zerah might be a title, not a personal name, perhaps indicating a regional leader with divine status, as was common among African kings of the time. Others propose he was the leader of a coalition, gathering forces from various southern tribes with the goal of conquering and plundering Judah. Whatever the case, he was coming with a thirst for destruction, and the chosen battlefield was Mareshah, an open plain near Judah's southwestern border. It was the ideal terrain for war chariots, flat, without many obstacles, perfect for a swift and deadly assault. Asa had the chance to retreat. He could have fled, hidden, or negotiated, but he did the opposite. He marched there with his army, put his people in formation, and in the face of the impossible, he did the unthinkable. While the enemy sharpened their weapons, Asa sharpened his faith. The atmosphere was tense. The sun burned on the armor. The ground trembled with the weight of the horses. Zerah's generals shouted orders in foreign tongues, and in the midst of it all, Asa did what no rational man would do in such a situation. He stopped and prayed. Before the first arrow was loosed, Asa knelt. He didn't seek an alliance with Egypt. He sought the only source of power that truly mattered, the God of Israel. The prayer he offers in the following verse, which we'll explore next, is one of the most beautiful and sincere in the entire Bible. But before the prayer came, the weight of the decision. This was the moment that tested the fiber of a king. This was the moment the throne became an altar. This was the moment the war would be won on his knees, and Asa chose to trust. This act became a turning point in Judah's history, and it could also become a landmark in your life today. How many times have you found yourself surrounded by problems that seem to number 1 million? How many times have your resources seemed far too small? How many times has life led you to the plain of Maresha, where everything around you screamed defeat? Asa teaches us that there is another way, that before you lift your sword, you must lift your eyes, and before you fight with your arms, you must fight with your heart. What comes next is the miracle, and it begins with a prayer that echoes through the centuries. Stick with us, because we have a revelation coming that is going to astonish you. The battlefield was set. On one side, 1 million Ethiopian soldiers with 300 war chariots, a force that would make any king kneel in fear. But Asa's knee touched the ground for a different reason. He knew that victory is not born from human strength, but from divine intervention. The second book of Chronicles, chapter 14, verse 11, gives us the exact words of his prayer, one of the briefest and most powerful in the Bible. Lord, there is no one like you to help the powerless against the mighty. Help us, O Lord our God, for we rely on you, and in your name we have come against this vast army. This prayer wasn't just a request, it was a declaration of faith, a total surrender, a cry from the soul of someone who knew that without God, he was defeated before the battle even began. But Asa was not alone, and he knew it. The structure of this prayer reveals 3 profound truths about the heart of that king. First, an acknowledgement of divine power. He begins, "There is no one like you to help the powerless against the mighty." A clear recognition that God does not operate according to human logic. He can act with many, with few or with none at all, because he is the Lord. Second, a confession of dependence. Help us, O Lord our God. Asa doesn't trust in his 580,000 soldiers. He knows that without the Lord, 1 million wouldn't be enough. His strength comes from on high, and that is what he clings to. Third, total surrender. In your name we have come against this vast army. The king surrenders not only the battle, but also the glory of the victory. Asa doesn't want to win to be acclaimed. He wants to win so that God's name will be honored among the nations. These words carry the weight of a faith that isn't measured by what is seen, but by what is believed. Asa stood before a multitude, but he saw beyond it. He saw the God of heavenly armies, invisible to human eyes, but present in the spirit of those who believe. This prayer echoes other powerful prayers in the Bible, like that of Jehoshaphat, who also, facing a greater enemy, said, "We have no power, but our eyes are on you." 2 Chronicles chapter 20, verse 12. Or like Hannah's, who didn't need to raise her voice, but simply moved her lips with sincerity for God to hear. Or like David's before Goliath, "I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty." Asa's prayer carries the same DNA: simplicity, dependence, and unwavering faith. According to the theologian Chrysostom, a prayer made in faith is a wall stronger than stone. Augustine said, "When a man prays with humility, God leans down to listen," and God heard Asa. But before the answer came, there was silence, the kind of silence that precedes the thunder of glory. Asa rose from that sacred ground of prayer, and with him rose the invisible force of heaven. Imagine the impact on his army. The generals, the soldiers, the officers, all watching their own king bend his knees. In modern times, this might seem like weakness. For Asa, it was leadership. True leadership begins on your knees, and the people were inspired. Fear gave way to faith. Desperation yielded to hope, Something had shifted in the air, and it wasn't strategy, it was presence. Today, many of us face our own Zeras. Giant enemies, fatal diagnoses, unpayable debts, silent depressions. You look and you see an army surrounding you that seems impossible to defeat. But listen to Asa's prayer, feel its truth, and understand nothing is impossible for God. You don't need many. You don't need strength. You don't need visibility, recognition, or resources. You need a dependent heart. A sincere prayer offered in faith still moves heaven. And that is exactly what happened on that plain of Maresha. Before a single arrow was shot, the miracle was already on its way, because the God of Asa does not change. He hears, he acts, and he saves. Stay until the end, because the victory that follows is one of the most extraordinary in all of biblical history. And what happened there will stir your faith. The sky was still hazy with the dust kicked up by the war chariots. 1 million Ethiopian soldiers positioned themselves like a tsunami about to engulf Judah. But little did they know, they were about to be defeated by something that no military strategy could ever contain. A sincere prayer, a dependent heart, and the invisible hand of the Almighty God. The continuation of the account is in the second book of Chronicles, chapter 14, verses 12 through 15. The Lord struck down the Ethiopians before Asa and Judah. The Ethiopians fled, just like that. No grand tactical details, no human glory. It was God who defeated them. The biblical text makes it clear. This wasn't just a victory, it was a direct intervention. As the Ethiopian war chariots charged forward, something paralyzed them. As the enemy soldiers advanced, something confused them, and what began as an attack transformed into a rout. The people of Judah, led by Asa, pursued the Ethiopians all the way to Gerar, a region near Philistine territory. There, the remnants of the invading army were completely undone. They didn't just win, they dominated. And then came the spoils. The Bible mentions that they carried off camels, sheep, tents, and an abundance of riches. The fields of their enemies became the inheritance of the faithful. God not only delivered them from the war, He rewarded them with provision. If this story is strengthening your spirit, help this message reach more people by sharing this video with someone you know. The impact of this victory was immense. Judah went from being a vulnerable target to a feared power. Asa's fame spread like wildfire, not just for the strength of his army, but for the uniqueness of his victory. Everyone knew that King trusted in God, and God answered. Archaeological evidence corroborates the context of this moment. In Gerar and in the vicinity of Tel Gemed, archaeologists have found traces of military occupation and Egyptian records of movements against Nubian peoples. Some scholars believe these inscriptions mention troops from the south who retreated into the desert, falling back before a smaller yet spiritually cohesive people. Although they don't mention Asa by name, they are historical echoes that reinforce the veracity of the biblical setting. The victory also had a gigantic psychological weight. How many of Judah's soldiers left home in fear, thinking they would never see their families again? How many mothers prayed for their sons that morning? How many men marched with their hearts pounding in their chests like a drum on fire, only to return with peace in their eyes and praise on their lips? This victory was more than military. It was spiritual. It rewrote Judah's identity. King Asa was now more than a reformer. He was a living example of how true faith moves mountains, or rather, melts armies. The Bible concludes this moment with a simple but glorious sentence. And there was no more war until the 35th year of Asa's reign. 2 Chronicles chapter 15 verse 19. 35 years of peace. 35 years without invasions. 35 years to build, to teach, to strengthen, all because of one choice: to depend on God. Let's reflect on this deeply. How many times do we look at a problem that seems like an army of 1 million? How often do we think our prayers are too small for the size of the fight? How many times do we want to battle with the strength of our own arm, when the real victory comes from our knees on the ground? What ASA shows us is that the impossible is merely the stage where God reveals who He is. The secret of victory wasn't in the number of soldiers, nor in military skill, nor in geographical position. It was in the faith of a king who dared to pray when everyone expected him to fight. God is still looking for ASAs in our day, men and women who will say, "Help us, Lord, for we rely on you." People who, even in fear, walk onto the battlefield with their eyes fixed on heaven. Because when you hand your war over to God, the victory might come with spoils, but the greatest treasure will be the peace that no one can ever steal. How many times have you found yourself surrounded by a problem that seemed to have no way out? As if an army of 1 million voices was telling your heart, you are not going to make it. It is in that moment that the story of King Asa becomes more than just a biblical narrative. It transforms into a call to action. Asa was a young king who refused to conform to the sin of his people. He didn't use his age as an excuse. He didn't lean on corrupted traditions. He shattered idols, reformed worship, and bent his knees before God. And what did he receive? 10 years of peace. And then the opportunity to face the impossible and conquer it with a single prayer. You might not wear Asa's crown, you might not command an army, but you have something he also had: access to the God who hears. The message of this story is crystal clear. It's not about the amount of strength you possess. It's not about the size of your battle. It's about the posture of your heart before God. Asa teaches us that faith is more powerful than the sword, that humility overcomes pride, and that dependence on God builds a peace that outlasts any war. And perhaps like Asa, you are at a moment of decision. Are you going to trust in your own strategy, or are you going to surrender to the one who can do all things? This story hands us an eternal principle. Whoever kneels before God can stand before any enemy. Asa's victory brought 35 years of peace. Imagine that. 35 years without war. 35 years to build a legacy. 35 years to say God fought for us. And today, He continues to fight. You may be tired. You might think you've already prayed too much. But the same God who heard Asa's prayer at Maresha has His eyes on you right now. Your prayer is still your most powerful weapon. Your faithfulness still has immense value, and your trust could be the key to a lasting peace. So here is the question that has echoed from ancient times until today. Will you trust? Because whoever trusts in God never fights alone. Are you subscribed yet? If not, now is the time. Click subscribe right now. Leave your like and comment on how this message has touched your heart. Let's spread stories together that build up, that awaken faith, and that remind the world our God still fights for us.